All right, I think we're there. I think we're here. Welcome, and you're already here. I can see that. Thank you so much. Well, as we get going, I want to mention a few things. First of all, I've replaced my standard LOL gnome in the back with dahlias today because dahlias are the queens of October. And we are going to talk more about dahlias coming up. Also, for those of you who have not been with me in a happy hour before, if you're with me in this Zoom presentation, you can type your questions in chat. All right, and you can type any question anytime in there, and I answer them after I finish with the presentation. But what I would love for somebody to type in chat right now is if this is your first time joining me in a Zoom happy hour. I would also love to know what's in your glass, all right? Because we often start off by sharing what is in your glass. And if you can, somebody type in what is in your glass. I think everybody has the, all right, very good. Everybody has the ability to type in there. Wonderful, Rebecca, welcome. Good to hear from you all. Cab sounds wonderful. I'll tell you what I have in my glass, which I have to wait until after the Zoom to drink because I can't drink and Zoom at the same time. But what I have in my glass is a grapefruit juice sage cocktail that is made with lime juice, a little bit of agave syrup, grapefruit juice, and gin. You can also make it with whiskey, and that I will wait and put some ice in it after our time together tonight. So I am so glad you're all assembling here. And as I often say, if you haven't been with me before, what I say is, it's not important what is in your glass. What is important is that we sit down together and spend a little time celebrating being together, if only virtually, and relaxing and talking about plants and gardens. And that's what's important, whether you are sipping sparkling water or cider, hard or soft, or whether you have some bourbon or whiskey or a Bloody Mary, as Robert does. Whatever it is, what matters is that we're here to celebrate plants and gardens, and let's get to it. So let me share my screen. Let me get my slideshow going, because we are celebrating your garden in the late fall. And I have to say, you know, many times people say they love summer the most. I love fall on Cape Cod. Tonight, we're going to be talking about planting. We're going to be talking about saving plants, which you should bring in and which you should not. We're talking about dahlias. I already told you about that. We're talking about some fall foliage. And of course, we're answering all of your garden questions, be they about your hydrangeas or your houseplants. Fall on the Cape is glorious, right? September and October, oh, stunning. They're harvesting cranberries on the bogs. And, you know, on a sunny day when you go by a bog where the harvest is going on, it takes your breath away. The fall foliage, it just keeps getting better and better. And certain trees turn at different times. This happens to be a Franklinia, and this is the Franklinia that is in Armstrong Kelly Park in Osterville. Kind of a quirky tree there, quirky tree in my yard too, but a wonderful native tree that gets beautiful fall color, often while it still has white flowers on it. It's the time of year that some trees lose their leaves very quickly, and when the moon comes up and gets caught in the branches, you have to stand outside and admire it. That's all there is to it. And it's the time of year when we're starting to get cozy. Here is our beloved cashier, Chris, at the store, and firewood is on many people's minds because they want a cozy fire at this time of year. And I have been firing up the wood stove almost every night at my house. So It's also a year where it's also a time of year when the vegetable garden is winding down. Now, this is a tomato that I spied on one of my plants last week. And I said, this tomato is ready for Halloween, right? Because the combination of uneven temperatures, uneven watering at this time of year, and blight caused this one to look like it is aspiring to be a Halloween pumpkin. We are still harvesting Mountain Magic tomatoes in my yard and garden. And if you have not grown Mountain Magic, check it out next year because it is the longest, hardest working tomato. They are small, but they taste good. I had fresh tomatoes for breakfast on my toast with avocado this morning. I'll probably have them maybe with some pasta tonight. And those Mountain Magic are the most early blight resistant tomato there is. So if you want a long producing tomato plant, write Mountain Magic on your calendar for next May. And we do grow them at Country Garden every year. It is the time of year when we are planting garlic, and this is on our to-do list for this weekend. I know that tomorrow afternoon we will be out in our vegetable garden digging that 3-inch deep trench, separating the cloves of garlic from the heads, spacing them out about 6 inches apart, and burying them. No, you do not have to mulch them to protect the plants that do put up little shoots in November or early December. That's fine. Those little shoots are photosynthesizing. And here on the Cape, we do not need to provide a big blanket of mulch like they might have to up in northern Vermont or in Maine. Now, we have not had a frost yet. And I know that some people have been saying, oh, isn't it late for a frost? Isn't it late? Well, I want to talk a little bit about that. This is one of the reasons to take frequent photos in your yard and garden all the time. Photograph whatever's going on in your yards and gardens, the good stuff and the spooky Halloween tomatoes, you know, everything, because it's all great information. And if you don't keep a garden journal where you write down things like first frost and last frost, guess what your journal is? Your cell phone, right? So I went back for the past 3 years and I looked to see, because every year I do take photos of the first frost. In 2019, the first frost was on November 1st, all right? And that wasn't a real heavy killing frost, except for some of the annuals, you know. With a light frost, the things like impatiens go. And, you know, those more tender plants go. But some of the other plants will withstand a light frost, and they don't go until there is a heavy frost. But 2019, November 1st, light frost. November 9th in 2020, and I can tell that it was a light frost here because some things made it, like this Nicotiana. If you like plants that will go through some frost, this Nicotiana, and this variety is called Marshmallow, and I grew it from seed. You have to grow that one from seed. But it does self-seed, and you usually have it, and then you always have it. And that goes through frost. The pineapple sage here, and this is Golden Delicious Pineapple Sage, that went pretty well through a light frost on November 9th, but the marigolds got it, and they died after that. And a couple of other plants, this is a African blue basil here, that, you know, succumbed to a light frost. In 2021, it was November 19th, a little later, okay? So the trend has been for the frost to get a little later, but that's when we got that, you know, kind of medium frost on November 19th last year. So any time now, but probably not until November, we will have a light frost. When I look at the weather forecast for the next week, there is not frost predicted. In fact, it's going to get a little bit warmer. Good news for my Mad Hatter peppers, and that's the variety you see here, a fun variety to grow. Good news for those, they are still producing in my vegetable garden. Good news for the 2 zucchinis that I still have producing, and good news for the green beans that I still have producing as well. And good news for the dahlias, because they are in their prime. As you see with the ones next to me, man, they are going gangbusters. And be sure to get out there tomorrow and pick yourself a bouquet of dahlias if you've grown them, because it's supposed to rain on Sunday. And we all know what happens with a big heavy dahlia flower in the rain. Oftentimes it'll fall down. So pick them tomorrow, pick a big bouquet, drop some off at your neighbor's house, give some to the person at the supermarket, some random stranger that you see, hand them some dahlias because they are so glorious. And look at this, in this one, there's a bee tucked in there. The bees appreciate the dahlias and the zinnias too at this time of year. But pretty soon, once it gets to be hard frost, that's the time, if you are going to save your dahlias, that's the time to dig them up. And this is a picture that I took, I can't remember when it was, but a year or two ago, when we had that heavy frost. And there is some thought that it is worth waiting to dig your dahlias until after the first heavy frost, because the plants drain their carbohydrates, their energy, into the tubers. I have not read any science behind that theory, but longtime dahlia growers have told me that. Here's the thing, what I often say is there is an ideal time and then there's real life. If you want to dig your dahlias up tomorrow, even though they're still in full bloom and green, if you need to do it for some reason, maybe you're traveling after that, by all means, go ahead and do it. Will they die if you leave them in the soil into November? No, because although the tops may get frosted, the ground is not going to freeze until sometime into December. And so if you don't have to dig your dahlias up right away, I would by all means let them stay in the ground. Occasionally someone will leave their dahlias in the ground over the winter. Usually, and I'm saying usually here on the Cape, they do come back depending on how cold it has gotten in the winter time. It's not a good idea to leave them in the ground year after year after year, because the tubers get so congested that they actually kill themselves off. So good to dig them at least every other year, because look at this. This was one dahlia tuber that we planted in May, and now look, it is, a dozen dahlia tubers or more. And so they do multiply. And if you leave them in the ground too long, then they get just too congested and then they will rot and not be as large of plants or not live at all. So if you want to save them from year to year, the percentage play is to dig them up right after that first frost. And you pop them out of the ground and you shake off as much soil as possible. Now, there are some people who store them with the dirt on. We have decided that there's no benefit to that. And frankly, it's just messier in the spring when I open them up again, and then there's all this dust and dirt in there. So now what we do is, this is in the time when we would pile them and let them dry out with the dirt on them. If you use that method, it's going to take them longer to dry. Okay, know that if you don't wash them off with the hose, you're going to need to let them dry out in your garage or under cover somewhere for a good 3 weeks, because it takes a long time for that soil to lose its moisture. And if you pack them up when they're damp, they will mold and you will lose your tubers. So you want them, if you leave the dirt on, you want them very dry. Now we've decided that it's easier for us and better on the other end in the spring to wash the tubers off. My friend and fellow podcast co-host Ellen Zakos Many of you have met her when she came to Country Garden and did a program with me a few years back. Ellen would have me remind you that dahlia tubers are edible. And what she does is she, cleans them, peels them, grates them like a potato, and makes quick breads out of them. I don't do that. I have better things to eat than my dahlia tubers, but just know that they are edible, all right? After you wash them off, again, bring them into a garage or a shed or into a basement or a covered porch so that they are out of the weather and they can dry off. And if you've washed the soil off of them, then it takes them usually about a week to 10 days in order to get dry. At that point, there are several things you can do, all right? And by the way, when you're drying them off, don't let them freeze. So if you've dug them toward the end of November, watch the forecast, because I clearly remember the year that my husband and I traveled to California in early December. We left the dahlia tubers in the shed saying to each other, oh, it's not going to get cold enough to freeze, right? Well, wouldn't you know, that particular December, it went down to 12 degrees for 2 nights, and it ruined all of our dahlia tubers. So put them in a place to dry off where they're not going to freeze. After they're dry, all right, you can put them in paper bags. This is one method, and put in dry potting soil or peat moss or sawdust. Now, if you use dry potting soil, and I emphasize dry because sometimes you buy a bag of potting soil and it's damp. So got to be dry. If you use dry potting soil, you can then use that potting soil to pot up your summer annuals, right, the following year. So, you get 2 for 1, you've already got that potting soil. So that's an idea. But it all has to be dry if you use any of those things, all right? Or you can wrap them in layers of newspaper and put them either in paper bags or in cardboard boxes. That's the method that I use, all right? I wrap them up in layers of newspaper and then pack them into cardboard boxes. You do not want to put them in plastic bags. You do not want plastic because you need some air circulation so that they are not going to mold. So you could wrap them up in, if you have packing paper, you could wrap them up in that. And there are places that you can buy, big packages of packing paper. Or maybe you save the packing paper that you've gotten when you make purchases at Christmas tree shop. But that's a good thing to use if you no longer subscribe to a printed newspaper. And I would encourage you to label the boxes or the bag or wherever you've put them, and then store them someplace cool, all right? Store them where it's going to be cool, but not freezing. You want the temperature to be in that 40 to 50 degree range. So not in the shed where if it goes down to 12, they're going to die, all right? We keep ours in an unheated garage. We store them on an upper shelf because heat rises. And usually in that garage, it maintains a temperature of about 40 degrees, even when it's well below freezing outside during the winter. So you might have that space in your basement. And in a basement where the furnace is, you would probably want to store your dahlias on the floor where it's cooler, because any heat from the furnace rises up. And so down on the floor of the basement, it's probably not going to freeze, but it is going to be cooler. And that's how you will keep your dahlias, and you will keep them that way until it's time to plant them in May next year. And then at that time, you can take the tubers and first take the ones that already have a little sprout on them and cut them off of the big clump and plant them. And the other ones you can either plant or give away. And sometimes what we do is we start them, the other ones in pots, and then we can either give them to people or plant them where we want them. So let's talk a little bit about saving annuals and tropical plants, because I know many of you are thinking, that hibiscus or that mandevilla is really beautiful. Maybe I should save that for next year. First of all, I would encourage you to save those things that are rare or unusual, all right? If you have purchased a plant that you think, whoa, this is a knockout and I haven't seen this before, I want to save it. This happens to be a variegated hibiscus that it is from Hawaii, and I try and save this plant every year because I love the variegated heart-shaped leaves that come out pink and then turn green and white, and it's not an easy plant to find. So anything that's rare or unusual, that is worth saving. I, debated a little bit one year about saving my King Tut papyrus. This is how my King Tut looks at this time of year when the harvest moon comes up. I love this plant. One year I did save it. It got mealybug inside the house. And so I decided, every year I can get a new one of these at Country Garden. This isn't a plant that I need to save. So I don't anymore. But if you want to try your King Tut or Prince Tut or Queen Tut papyrus, they can be saved. Here's a hint: put them in a deep dish or a deep saucer because they do not like to dry out in the house. In terms of your standard plants, your petunias and impatiens and, the things that you can buy every year, it is probably not worth saving those indoors, all right? Because you can purchase them every year. Now, occasionally you'll have a special geranium that you like a lot. Bring that in and put it in front of a sunny window. I have a variegated geranium plant that I do save from year to year because I don't see it often in the garden center. So, use your judgment about that. But I would say anything common, you don't have to save it. Now, tropical hibiscus are one of the easiest tropicals to save, all right? Bring them inside, put them in front of a sunny window. This is not a plant to let go dormant in a cold garage. Any tropical plant does not like it when the temperatures go much below 55. So your hibiscus and other tropical plants should be brought into the house, not into the garage. And here is a tropical hibiscus blooming into December in front of a south-facing window in my living room. Now, mandevilla vine is one that, although it is easy to save, there are reasons why you might not want to, okay? And I will tell you, I do not save my mandevilla from year to year. Even though, they're gorgeous. This is one that I grew last year in with a begonia. Don't overlook planting mandevillas in with other annuals. They are wonderful companion plants for other annuals. But they do live if you bring them in the house, and you can put them in front of a sunny window. They're as prone to the usual aphids and mealybug as any other annual that you bring in, or any other tropical that you bring inside. So you got to watch the insects. But the problem with saving a mandevilla is unless you have it under grow lights and give it very long days during the winter and then start to taper it down to short days, it will not come into flower for you until August, all right? Because that's what brings this plant into flower. When you buy a mandevilla at Country Garden in May, the grower has done that for you. They've paid the electric bill to make that plant think it's gone through long days of the summer solstice and then into the shorter days. And so it's already in flower when you buy it in May, and it stays in flower through the entire summer. But unless you're willing to do that with grow lights, to give it 12-hour and then 13-hour and then 14-hour and then 15-hour of days, and then taper it down, your mandevilla will flower, but it won't flower until August. So I leave that to you. If you are bringing any plants inside, please be sure that you have trays and saucers under them so you can water them well without fear of flooding your carpets and your floors, all right? Because I have seen many people who hesitate to give their plants much water because of the flood that happens after they water the plants, and then their plants don't do well. All right, they're giving their plants a lick and a promise rather than a good, solid soaking. So, you know, there are any number of saucers and trays available that you will fit either on your floor or on your windowsill so that you can water those plants with abandon. And I, by the way, use saucers under each individual plant, and there is a tray under the saucer in case I've not calculated correctly and the saucer overflows. So double, you know, double protection. And here you can see I've got trays and saucers. This is what my kitchen looks like right now because I am bringing my houseplants and some tropicals in. This is a variegated ginger plant. It is a tropical that I have grown for, a good 15 years, I think. And it comes into my kitchen every year along with some of my begonias. And also coming into my house are the house plants that were sent to summer camp during the summer, and they are coming back from summer camp over the past couple of weeks. Now, when you bring a plant inside, expect leaf drop. They're gonna do that, all right? Because even in the sunniest southern exposure, like here at my house, that's not as much light as these plants had outside. So expect them to drop leaves. And you might want to pick up some of these yellow sticky cards at the garden center for when you bring your plants inside. These are sometimes called whitefly traps and sometimes called insect traps. They work because insects are attracted to the color yellow. They perceive it as some super foliage, right? Because green is made up of yellow and blue. And so the insects are attracted to this, and you will see that it will trap all those little pesky fungus gnats and some whitefly and you know, any of the flying insects, you will find that it traps. It is also a good monitor. You know, when you see a card that's all filled with bugs like this, you know, maybe you need a little something more. Maybe you need to water those plants with spinosad, Captain Jack's dead bug brew in the tank to kill the larva of the fungus gnats. Maybe you need to spray those plants with insecticidal soap or Neem Max. I like Neem Max and I like insecticidal soap. Now, what about plants that you might want to leave outside? I'm not talking, of course, about tropicals or the tender annuals. I'm talking about perennials, all right? Or shrubs and trees. Some people say, can I leave this out over the winter or do I need to bring it into the garage? Here's the criteria, all right? If you're gonna leave it outside, it has to be in a pot that's not gonna crack, no clay pots, all right? It has to be a plant that is hardy 2 zones colder from where you are. We here on the Cape are in a warm zone 6, some parts of the Cape a cold zone 7. That means that that plant that you want to leave outside has to be hardy in a zone 4 or 5. You can look that up on Google, right? Is a peony hardy? Or you can just type peony hardiness zone and it'll come up. Now, peonies, speaking of peonies, here they are growing on my driveway in Osterville. I didn't have enough sun in my garden for all the peonies I wanted to grow, so I grew them in pots on the driveway. And plastic pots here. That blue pot is not going to stay out. That's something else. But the plastic pots, they grew and bloomed on my driveway all, you know, in June. And then in the wintertime, I pulled them over to the side of the house so that the snowplow wouldn't plow them up, right? But because peonies are hardy in a zone 4 or maybe even 3, they were perfectly fine outside in their containers. So if you've got a plant that is, you want to leave in a pot, look up the hardiness of it because pots get 20 degrees colder than ground temperature. That's why the plant needs to be hardy 2 zones colder from where you are. Roses in pots are iffy. If I was growing, I did grow these roses in pots one year, but if I was growing roses in pots right now, I would bring those into a shed or an unheated garage and let them overwinter with some protection, because they tend not to be as hardy in a zone 4 as some other plants are. But if you know your plant is hardy and it's in a plastic pot, leave it out. For years, I had this pussy willow tree in a pot. Last year, it ended up dying, not because of it had gone over the winter, but because it dried up. You know, at a certain point, I had forgotten to water it and the poor thing died. So you aren't a gardener until you've killed plants. Now let's talk about what my friend Roberta Clark calls the driveway collection. Maybe you have a driveway collection. That's a collection of the plants that you either purchased early in the season and never got around to planting. I still have a couple of those on my driveway. Maybe they are the plants that you have purchased on sale. You know, right now at Country Garden, the evergreens are 50% off and the deciduous trees are 75% off. Well, a lot of people are buying the plant because they're a good deal and they're nice looking plants, right? And then they get them home and they think, I'm not sure where I'm going to put it. Can I leave it in a pot over the winter? The answer is the same. It's got to be hardy 2 zones colder from where you are if you want to leave it in a pot. I would encourage you, however, to get those plants in the ground now if you can, all right? And tomorrow is going to be a great day to do that. So, and even if you decide to move it next spring, you know, some people even dig a hole in their vegetable garden and plop it in just to protect the roots and to have it get, you know, a little bit of a root system going. And then they move it to its permanent location in March or April or early May. That's absolutely fine. So you know, if possible, get that driveway collection into the ground. Yes. And after you plant it and plant it in the native soil, you know, the current science is that you don't amend the hole. All right. You don't put the peat moss and the cow manure in the hole like I was taught as a new gardener, and probably you were too. No, you amend like nature does it from the top down. And if you're planting at this time of year, I would encourage you not to amend with peat moss, but to amend with one of the dark composts or mulch for a couple of reasons. All right. Here's black mulch. You can get it in the bag. It's dyed, or as we say, color enhanced, but it's dark. And you could also use Coast of Maine manure. Look at how dark this is. This was a broken bag that I spotted on the side of the garden center, and I took a picture to show you how dark that is. That would be perfect soil amendment. Put a couple of bags all around that area, a 2-inch layer all around those plants, because not only does that amend from the top down, which is how nature grows plants, right? But it's also, because it's dark, it absorbs heat. Here's another one, the humus and manure that we sell. You can use that, that's also dark, because it amends from the top down better than putting it in a hole. And the dark color absorbs the heat from the sun. And studies have shown that it can keep the ground warmer for up to 2 weeks longer. And why is that good? Because the warmer the soil, the more your newly planted plant is going to grow its roots before winter time, which means it's going to be in better shape to last the winter, which means it's going to be in better shape to grow for you next spring. So get those driveway collection in the ground, mulch around the top with dark mulch or composted manure, and your plants are going to be happy and healthier. Now let's talk about some plants that we don't plant, but we don't bring into the house. Instead, we keep them in cold storage, like my fig trees. Here is cold storage in my garage, and the fig trees are in the middle. And my husband has to, when we pull his car in the garage when it's going to snow, he has to duck under the branch of the fig tree. But there you go. That's the price we pay for eating all the figs And the agapanthus. There are many plants that can go into the garage to stay over the winter. Hydrangeas in containers. You can grow a lot of hydrangeas in containers and put them in an unheated garage for the winter. Doesn't have to be light, they're dormant, okay? Even the agapanthus, it gets a little light from my garage door windows, but not much, because when they're cold, they're not really, using a lot of energy up. You do want to water things in cold storage when they are starting to get dry. And the colder it is, the less frequently you need to water. I might water these fig trees once a month in December, January, and February. And then in March, when they start to break dormancy in the garage, I might need to water them a little more often. But just get in the habit of checking them. If you go away for the winter, have a neighbor stop by once every 2 or 3 weeks and check the soil. And if they are dry, give them a drink, all right? Now, this is a good time of year to spot invasive plants in your yard and garden. The birds plant them. It's what I call the Cape Cod jungle. If you look closely around a lot of your shrubs and trees, particularly on the edges of your property, you will probably spot them. And this is the good time of year to spot them. If you see these very dark black blue berries, that is privet, okay? And if a privet is growing where you don't want a privet hedge, that is, a plant that is not a native plant. It is an invasive plant. You will spy it also in a lot of our conservation areas. And so once you see this, you will know, oh, that's privet. I probably don't want that there. And you cut it off at ground level at this time of year. Up here, the orange berries, that of course is the bittersweet. And then the bright red there is the native, the non-native rose, Rosa multiflora. Both of these are invasive plants that the birds spread, and you probably have them in your yard right now. Now these, by the way, these rose hips of the Rosa multiflora, they're nice and fun to put in arrangements at this time of year. So, cut it off at ground level, but pick some of the rose hips and put them in a vase with your dahlias and your zinnias, and they are really quite gorgeous, but worth getting out of your property for sure. If you cut them off at ground level in the fall, they are a little less likely to return, but watch in case they put up new growth. If they are of some size, they may put up new growth next spring, but you will remember where they were and cut them off again. Now, these are plants that you might find growing everywhere, but all three of them in this picture are native plants, and we don't consider native plants invasive. Here, they might be a nuisance, right? You might not want them in your shrubs and trees, but they're not invasive. And here is the Virginia creeper. Here is the wild grape. And then the one with the thorns is the catbrier, bullbrier, AKA that blankety blank thorny vine, right? So good time of year to spot all of those as well. The blankety blank thorny vine is yellow at this time of year, as are the grapevines, and the Virginia creeper is turning a beautiful shade of pink and red. But know that if these are growing on the edges of your property where you don't care if they grow or not, all three of these plants do provide food for wildlife and native wildlife. And so they are not problem plants when they're in the right location. Let's talk a little bit about leave the leaves. You will see people talking about leaving the leaves. And I will say to you, there are places that you can leave the leaves and places that you should clean them up, all right? And I think people need to know that it's a good thing to have areas of your garden, maybe on the edges of your property or in your shade garden or whatever, that you can leave the leaves for the insects that do overwinter. Not a huge number of insects overwinter in leaves, but some do. Most insects are actually in the ground overwintering. But if there are places that you can leave them, by all means do. I would tell you to clean up your hydrangea foliage underneath your hydrangeas. And this is because the chili thrips that cause this damage on hydrangea leaves, the chili thrips overwinter in the leaf and the other organic matter under the plants. And it can be a very effective way to keep this problem at a minimum. This is what chili thrips does. It kind of distorts the foliage in a way that looks almost like herbicide damage, but it's not, it's an insect. So clean up under the hydrangeas. And on places that are near your house, I would say clean those areas up too. You are less likely to have rodent problems when you clear those areas so that the rodents don't have a place to hide in as they move from the outside into your house. So just good common sense. And I would also clear up the leaves that are on your lawn, because if they get thick on your lawn, they will smother the lawn before the spring. All right. It's time to bring amaryllis indoors for their 6 weeks in a cool resting area. You don't water them when you do that. Bring them in, don't cut the foliage down yet, but just bring them inside and let them sit, die back a little for 6 weeks, and then you can start to bring them in the house. This is where my amaryllis spend summer camp, and this weekend they are coming into the garage. And if you want to repot them at that time, you certainly can, or you can repot them before you bring them into the house. Either one is perfectly fine. It's also a great time to plant bulbs. End of October is bulb planting season, and I would get them in the ground sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And we still have a great selection of some really nice bulbs, including, I took this picture today. So I know we have all of these alliums, and we've got all of these great bulbs today. So get yourself some bulbs, and even if you just put 1 bag of bulbs in every fall, it's going to lift your heart come spring. It truly is. And there are some areas of your yard and garden that you just might want to wait and clean up later on in the spring. I will wait and clean up my shade garden in the spring. Many times people say, can I cut my hostas down now? If you want to, you can. But frankly, many hostas have fabulous fall color, number one. And number two, once hard frost hits them, they go flat on the ground, right? And then in the spring, it's an easy matter to just take your gloved hand and you pick up the skeletons of what was left if you want, or you can just mulch right over them and let the organic matter go right into the soil. Either way for the hostas. Okay, so we're going to come and stop my share now. We're going to get out of the presentation and I'm going to come into chat and answer your questions. So I'm going to start at the top and we'll take them as we go down. And thank you, David. You're very sweet. All right. So I love seeing what everybody has in their glass because I think it's inspiring. You folks, you drink some very interesting things, both alcoholic and non, and I love that. I have a Coast of Maine raised bed mix that I got at Country Garden last spring. Is it best to top dress my beds with it now or wait until spring? If I were you, I'd do it now. If their beds are open and ready, I'd do it now, because then in spring, when you're excited about doing other stuff, right? It's ready to go. So if you've got the time now, the weather is conducive. Tomorrow it's supposed to be in the mid 60s. Perfect for being outside, right? Sunny tomorrow. And then you can have at it and plant next spring. Are you still at a table on Fridays at Country Gardens to answer questions? No, I no longer have the official consultation table for the season because, frankly, I'm moving into Christmas at the garden center. But I will start that table up again in April, number one. And number two, know that if you come in, I am at Country Garden most Fridays, all right? And I am at Country Garden oftentimes on Monday. If you come in and you have a question or need identification, I'm happy to help you. So just have the cashier radio and find out where I am, And if I'm, you know, back in the Christmas clutter, you can come back and see me and I'm happy to help you. So no problems there. You might want to call to make sure that I'm in. I am, you know, going away for a week in early November. You know, just call and make sure I'm there. Let's see. I mentioned some yellow, possibly blue flower seeds that you had planted around a wall you had. I bought some and wanted to plant still. Didn't notice them at your home during the tour. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm trying to think of what blue flowers planted around a wall. I think you're going to have to give me a little more to work on there. If I think of what that might be, there aren't that many flowers that are blue. And, you know, I mean, there's certainly Russian sage, but I wouldn't grow those from seed. I'll have to think about that. Our son's backyard in Natick had a stand of 5 cypress that have done well, but one on the end is yellowing. Any suggestions? Probably the drought. All right. He might have a soil test done to make sure that the pH is still in the acid range and that there's nothing else going on at soil level for that plant. If it, you know, it's usually when an entire plant turns yellow, it's seldom a nutrient imbalance, but before he does anything with fertilizers, I'd have a soil test done and see. My guess is that it was the hot summer. And my guess is that that area of his property, since it's at the end, may not have gotten the same amount of water that other plants. That's what I would say. Our front yard is filled with sheep sorrel and weeds. We want to replace it using clover seed bought at Country Garden in 2021. What's the best and easiest way to do that? Is it too late this year? It might be too late this year, but frankly, I think you may be better off if you keep that seed for next year, put it in a jar and put it in a cool garage. All right, not where it's going to freeze and not in the refrigerator. Refrigerators have dehumidifiers that dry seed out. I would put it in a cool place to save it. If you bought it in 2021, you're getting to the 2-year mark, and oftentimes you get just a little less germination and a little less germination. So I might, if I were you, go ahead and scatter that seed in the lawn. And I have a feeling that a lot of it will be fine. Calamintha blue cloud, fall care. It depends on your feeling about what you do in your perennial garden. There are some people that leave perennials all winter because, as my friend Stephanie Foster says, snow needs something to fall on. And then there are other people who cut them off. Calamintha is a plant with very, very thin stems, so you don't have to be worried that there are insects overwintering in those stems. I know you'll read that on Facebook, but they don't overwinter in all stems, only in thicker, pithy stems, and Calamintha is one you can cut down. We bring our fig tree into the garage right before hard frost. So as long as it's nice outside, we will leave it. And as soon as I see on my weather app that it might get down to 32, then it comes into the garage. Can I overwinter my favorite geranium in an unheated basement? Can I skip watering it, and should I cut it back? You take the chance that it's going to die if you don't water it and you put it in an unheated basement with no light. The best way to overwinter geraniums is in a sunny window and you water them once a week. That's the best way. You could try putting it in that basement and not watering it and not cutting it back. If you cut it back, it'll be dead for sure. You can try putting it down. I would say you have a 25% chance of success and a 75% chance of it dying. So when do you plant anemone and ranunculus corms? Well, ranunculus is not a hardy bulb here. And so you would not put those in the ground. You would plant those in pots, and you could plant them in a cool garage, unheated garage that doesn't go below freezing soon, all right? Anemones, it depends on the type of anemone that you're talking about. If you're talking about the big purple and pink ones, those are also not hardy here. And so you would, if you have those, then you would plant them in pots in a cool but not freezing area, and then bring them into the house sometime in, I would say late January or early February. Should I feed evergreens now? Do I need to feed any plants now? No, in fact, I think I'm trying to remember when state law, it might be the middle of November. Massachusetts has fertilizing laws in effect, with good reason, because if you fertilize in the winter, it just goes into our waterways, all right? It's really a little late now. And if I were you, I would focus on the compost. I would focus on compost and manure. I would focus on getting that amendments down on top of your soil and around your plants, which helps keep your soil healthy, far more important than any fertilizer. And then fertilize with that organic fertilizer next spring. Briefly tell us how to handle elephant ear bulbs. Number one, do not let them freeze, okay? So pretty soon when the temperatures start not going much above 50 during the day, bring that plant into the garage, let the leaves die back, all right? Don't water it, let the leaves die back, and then store that bulb in a place where it's not going to freeze. And you could, if your garage stays around 40 and above, that's a good spot. Some people do bring them into the house if they are already potted up. As you know, they're huge. And so you have to have the space to do that. But just be sure not to let them freeze. And they are heat-loving plants on the other end, so you want to not put them out too early. Let's see, do you cut back Shasta daisies, coreopsis, and black-eyed Susans in the fall? If you want to, yes. If they're still looking good, I would say leave them. My general rule of thumb is that any plant in my perennial garden that is capable of photosynthesis, that is, the leaves are green, right? That leaf is doing a job for the plant and I don't cut it down. And many of them, I don't cut down until the following spring. I would leave most of your grasses, all right? I would not cut down your grasses at this time of year, particularly the grasses like Japanese forest grass, the hackcone grass. How do you winterize your perennial hibiscus? That's one of the ones that has big fat stems that if you want to leave those stems for the benefit of overwintering insects, you certainly can do that. And you just leave them there, and then next early May, you cut the stems off at ground level. These plants do not break dormancy until sometimes the late May, early June. And so if you want to leave the stems, by all means, do that. If you really can't stand the way they look, then cut the stems down. Can I bring my lemon cypress inside for the winter? Yes, you should, because they are also marginally hardy here. So those lemon cypress plants are very successful house plants. We sell a lot of them as Christmas decoration plants because they're that pretty lime, lemon color, lime green that looks so good with a red poinsettia. And they make lovely house plants. Bring it inside fairly soon. You don't have to have it in full sunlight, but a bright location will be fine. But what you do need to pay attention to is not letting it dry up. Give it a good saucer underneath so that you can water it really thoroughly. Like any plant, water it well, let the water accumulate in the saucer for a little while. After 2 or 3 hours, if the plant hasn't absorbed all of that water, then you can dab it up with I use an old, what we called in our house, dog towels, the old threadbare towels that we use for the dog, I also use for the plants. So you can sop it up with a plant towel, or there are people who use a turkey baster, which is a little more work, but does the job. Okay, more yellow along the stone stairs, maybe. Okay, well, that might have been on the stone stairs. You might have seen California poppies, all right? Or you might have seen nasturtiums. Both of those I grow from seed, and both of those will grow on stone. Also, the other yellow one that you might have seen on my stone steps and in my stone walkway is basket of gold, Aurinia, A-U-R-I-N-I-A. And Basket of Gold blooms in the spring and has silver foliage in the rest of the summer. It loves gravel. It loves rocks. And so that is one that you might have seen. So I think those are good guesses. So not blue. Yeah. Let's see. Would you bring in a Prince Papyrus? It is in. Yeah, if you want. As I say, keep them moist. Number one. Keep it in a bright location. Doesn't need direct sun. Keep on the lookout for mealybug. That's what got my King Tut the year I overwintered it. So watch out for mealybug. Spray it promptly with Neem Max or insecticidal soap if you see mealybug. And yeah, keep it, the small water garden is fine. That is fine. As a former teacher, many folks ask trusted teachers to allow them to winter over their geraniums in their sunny classroom windows. Hey, I think that's a fabulous idea, right? Particularly those people who are going to Florida for the winter. And if that teacher has a sunny window, the geraniums are going to flower and they're a cheerful plant to have in the classroom. They're not toxic to anybody. So perfect sunny classroom plant. I love that. And you know what? Maybe there should be, Lucy, you might want to start this, or somebody should start this, somebody who knows a teacher. You could start a Facebook group for teachers willing to overwinter geraniums in the windows. It's a good combination of people who can't take care of them over the winter and people who would love that green and flowers over the winter. Is it too late to transplant a perennial hibiscus from one area of my garden to another? No, it's not. These are closing up shop now. You can still see where they are. By all means, dig them up, get as big of a root ball as you can and move it. But I would do it tomorrow so that then it gets well reined in on Sunday and Monday. I have thyme in a pot. Can it stay outside over the winter? Yes, thyme is hardy, at least to his own for. It should be fine unless, unless it's a variegated. If it's a lemon thyme or the silver variegated one, it may not be hardy. You might want to sink that into the ground, or sometimes even putting pots of these marginally hardy things like that into a window well, keeps it up, next to the house, and you can pile some leaves around it. You might try that. The downside of that, though, I have to tell you, is that you are creating, if you put a pot in a window well with some leaves around it, you're also creating a little nice mouse home. So yeah. My bee balm is in a pot. Should it be planted in the ground? I would do that. I would plant it in the ground. Tomorrow would be a great day to put it in the ground. Can I transplant a 5-foot 6-year hydrangea? Yes. And you can pop it out and move it whole, or you can cut it in half and have 2 plants. But know that it's probably going to affect the flowering for next year. And that would happen whether you move that hydrangea now or whether you move it in March or April. The flowering, the coming, summer is probably going to be affected. What is the coldest temperature my Brazilian skyflower can take? 50, 55. It's not going to be happy below 55. So yeah. I have heard 2 thoughts about rosemary. Can I winter it outside or should I bring it indoors? It completely depends on the variety of rosemary, where you live. If you live close to the ocean in Chatham or Truro, you're more likely to have it live. If you live away from the ocean in Marston's Mills or Sandwich, you're more likely to have it die. So, and it also depends on the winter coming up. If I were you, I'd bring it in the house and I'd put it in a sunny window and I'd remember to water it, because the herbalists say a dry rosemary in the house is a dead rosemary. So put it in a sunny window, water it regularly. And sometimes that means twice a week in a real sunny window, and use it, cook with it over the winter time. What's the best way to overwinter rosemary in the house? Sunny window, water it, cook with it. And by the way, sometimes rosemary in a cool room will get powdery mildew, don't worry about that. If it gets new foliage during the course of the winter that's prone to mildew, first of all, cut off the new foliage and use it in cooking. Use it in baked potatoes, it's delicious. If it has powdery mildew, cut off the new foliage, rinse it off, and use it in cooking. It has the same flavor and mildew doesn't hurt you a bit. All right, well, thank you, Lois. And Lois said thank you. And I think we're going to stop there because it is about 6 o'clock. It is time for me to toast to you with my beverage and thank you for joining me. We'll have this recording, if you missed part of it, we'll have it up on the Country Garden events page where you will also find lists of the upcoming other programs. And stay tuned because we've got a lot of fun holiday stuff going on at Country Garden this coming season. Come by and see us in the garden center. And in the meantime, enjoy your garden. Cheers.